Hey everyone, and welcome back. Now today I wanted to do a top check on Bitcoin because what we've seen lately is a lot of fear and uncertainty surrounding the price action of Bitcoin because we did hit all-time highs prior to the halving, and lately we've seen a lot of weakness showing in the price of Bitcoin with no upside breaks coming as some people have been expecting. So I think fear is compounding into the market. Now let's go ahead and dive right in. So we will start with the trusty crypto fear and greed index. As you probably could have guessed, we're still sitting in fear. This is becoming somewhat of a trend over time. I think this is something that we'll probably continue to see until we start to see a little bit more positive or bullish momentum within the market. As we can kind of see here, we've essentially had continuing lower highs, lower lows, and this is kind of worrying the market. Until we can see a breakout, I would imagine that we will be sitting in this extreme fear, maybe creeping up a little bit into the neutral. And moving on, I wanted to show something that we've been over on the channel before. But this, I think, is looking a little bit more interesting than when we looked at it last time. Because what we can see is we can see two bands up at the resistance level of Bitcoin. They're actually pretty substantial. We see one for about $3.6 billion at about 70,500. And then we see another one at about 72,500 for almost 4 billion. And then right above that, we've got another three at about 72,750. So essentially the 70,500 even up to the 73,000 range, this is a really big hotspot as far as liquidations are concerned. So if we were to see a move upward, I would imagine we'd see a pretty aggressive move if we were to break past this zone, because at that point essentially all of the shorts would have been liquidated and a lot of the sell pressure in the market would, I think, have capitulated at that point in time. So this is something for us to keep an eye on. I think as we kind of creep up closer, I don't know if we'll break through it immediately. We may be bouncing around for another couple months, but this is something that I would imagine that we break it at some point in the near future. And frankly, I mean, we have to break it if the bull run is to continue. So this is something to keep an eye on. The thing that I think is kind of interesting from a market maker perspective is there's a ton of liquidation money sitting up here. So if the market were to make an aggressive move above this level, a lot of people would get wrecked, which, as we are all well aware of, and we've probably all experienced in some case in the past, the market loves to inflict the maximum amount of pain. And based on looking at this liquidation heat map, I mean, it's very clear to see that this is where that would be. So anyway, moving on, I want to go look over the Bitcoin price temperature. So what we're going to start looking at now is some metrics to see if we can determine if we may have had a smaller top than what we did in previous bull runs. So, what we can see in previous bull runs looking at the Bitcoin price temperature. Now, to back up, the Bitcoin price temperature essentially takes an average of price appreciation over the period of time. So if Bitcoin's price were to double within the past, 2 days, the price temperature would be incredibly high. So that obviously raises the price temperature. And now if we were to see, Bitcoin price going down dramatically, then obviously the temperature gets very low, and sometimes we've seen it even turn negative. So this is something that we can take a look out for. But as we've seen in the past, at least in the two major bull runs of both 2017 and 2021, we saw that price got well into the fives, even up into the sevens. In 2017, looks like we got some that this was 9.5. So we got some pretty high watermarks as far as Bitcoin price temperature goes. What we can see in March and April, when we had a little bit of that run up prior to the halving, we saw price temperature get a little elevated from what it had been in the past, which I think makes a lot of sense given that this was kind of the depths of the bear market. But what we saw is, we never really saw anything get past 3. And we've seen this once before, and even maybe in a more isolated scale here, or before the 2017 bull run. So, this is something to me where if this were to be the top of the cycle, it wouldn't be a very fun top to have, as a crypto investor. But, that's an inevitability we all need to be prepared for. But looking at the historical data here, I mean, what we can see is, we can see small peak, drawback, big peak. Small peak, drawback, big peak. So, I could imagine that maybe we see something here and we draw back a little bit into a much larger peak. But again, some of this does have to coincide with macro trends that are evolving as well. So, I think that's why we might see maybe a little bit of a later peak than what some of us might imagine. Late 2024, possibly into late 2025. I mean, looking historically at the distance between this peak and this peak, this is almost a year and a half. In which case, I mean, we would be looking at like the very end of 2025 if it were to follow this timing. If it were to follow this timing, then maybe late 2024 to early 2025. So that's something just to consider as as we're looking at the market. Is the further in that you zoom, the harder it is to predict anything. But if you zoom out like this, and we're really just talking about cycle minimums to cycle maximums, it gets a lot easier to at least have a better guess. Not that anybody knows exactly what's going to happen. All right, moving on to the next chart, I want to talk about comparing bull markets. So what this chart does is this essentially takes every cycle and turns the gains into a percentage. And then what it does after that is it takes today's prices and then maps the percentage of those previous gains onto today's prices. So obviously, as we can see, era 2 had the highest gains percentage-wise, so that would be the highest price for us here. 3, same for, a little bit lower than that. So what we can see here is, maybe there almost should be like a reduction multiple to kind of bring these more in line with each other. I think that could be kind of an interesting chart to look at to see kind of, well, if this, was double this and this was, a certain, 8x this, like where, if we scale this down based on previous like changes, how would this look as like an estimate for, potential tops in this bull run? That could, I think, be a really interesting and useful chart. But anyway, back to the chart that we have at hand. As we can see in, era 2, obviously, the percentage gains were crazy at that point in time. And so if we were to see a similar run on this bull run, we would get to a $3.25 million Bitcoin. I think we can all agree that's probably a little bit unreasonable. I think there's a lot of people who expect to see Bitcoin at this price at some point. I just don't think anybody's really expecting to see it during this bull run. Now, if we look at era 3, we can see, about 1.1 million was like the absolute top here. And then in era 4, I think it was somewhere around 240-ish thousand, except for, obviously we come over here and we get to about 260,000 because we did have that late all-time high in era 4. So, and that's part of the reason we have this average days to all-time high at 445, is this new all-time high that we hit right before the halving definitely skewed the numbers a little bit. As we can kind of see, prior to this all-time high, the previous all-time highs did hit kind of between like, 288 days and like 345. So kind of within like the first year after halving. So this is something I think we should look out for. Obviously, as we can see so far, we've definitely underperformed, prior Bitcoin performances based on the halving cycle. But one thing that we do need to remember is that we did essentially do all of this running up to previous all-time highs before the halving, which hasn't necessarily happened before. We could see it era 2, it came back a little bit, but it was still almost 50% down from what its all-time high was. So I think that's kind of the reason we're seeing a little bit of maybe some lagging performance here, is because we kind of already saw all of this upside prior to the halving. So that's one thing that we need to consider when we look at this and maybe start to panic a little bit, because I mean, a lot of this has kind of already been done. It just happened here before the halving. So that's one thing just to consider. But I think this chart gives a good point of reference to see kind of, what we could see price wise. Again, I think, $1 million, $3 million Bitcoins are probably out of the question, but, something in the 240 range is probably a little optimistic, but, as we can see, it scales down over time. Maybe if we look at, 200, 180, 160 maybe $1,000 Bitcoin, that might be something that could be pretty reasonable. Now, before we jump into this last chart, if you are enjoying the content that I'm providing, please do go ahead and give a like and subscribe. It really does help me out a lot with the YouTube algorithm and help me grow my channel. So anyway, moving into this last chart, what we can see is this is the pi cycle top indicator. Now, every time in the past, we can see that every time the SMA 111 day crosses over the SMA 350 day, that essentially is kind of like the cycle top for that point in time. We can see it, this data looks like we have a double cross kind of within the same halving period. But if we look at 2017, it crosses almost at like the Pico top. And then if we look at 2021, it crosses a little bit after like the Pico top. But what we can see overall is every time we have seen a massive run up in price, we do see this cross happen. what we can see so far in this cycle is we've gotten nowhere even close to a cross like this happening, which means if history is to repeat itself, I mean, the top is nowhere even close to in. We would need to see, this run pretty dramatically to cross over it. And what we can see at the SMA 350 day, the price is about at 102,000 right now, which does, fall in line with the fact that, we would probably at least need to see 120, 140, $150,000 Bitcoin at least to see something like this cross. So that's something to consider as we're looking and trying to come up with some price targets for maybe when we start to trim some gains on our Bitcoins, maybe when we want to start looking into the altcoin market, because, remember, historically, Bitcoin usually does lead the altcoin market. So, after we've kind of seen a cycle top on Bitcoin, that's when we can go and start looking at, what the altcoins are going to start to do from there. So anyway, that's all I wanted to go over today. Hopefully you did find this information useful. If you did, please do like and subscribe. Like I said, it really does help me grow the channel and push me to more people in the YouTube algorithm. If you also have any comments or questions or have anything you want me to look over specifically, please do drop a comment. It does help me out. And I do also read all of my comments as well. So if there's anything that you're wanting to see, please do let me know, and I can make sure to cover that in a future video. Thank you for tuning in, and we'll see you in the next one.